Thank you, Mr. Massey. Ms. Leger Fernandez.
Mr. Massey, also known as, let's do it. Is it Kit? Is it, is it Shakespeare? Who is it, right? You know, I think what's really key here is that you are absolutely correct, that this is political theater. I would just object to your characterization of what this first act is, right? Because I think what this first act is an indication of where your values are and what you prioritize. And that is why we are as upset about this first act as we are. Because I've been out in my district. My district looks like your district, Mr. Massey. We talk about this all the time, right? I have a big rural district. I have lots of wonderful, beautiful Republican counties where I spend time with ranchers and farmers and people that I grew up with, and we need to do everything to help them. In those districts, we have some of the most patriotic communities. New Mexico has some of the highest levels of participation in the military. So you can imagine, when I go around to my districts, they tell me what they are worried about. And what they are worried about right now is they know that there is a shortfall for the VA funding. And they tell me, right, at the Labor Day parade in Ragged Mountain, it's called a Bean Day Parade, right? You can tell what happens in Ragged Mountain. They grow beans. And the color guard is worried because, as one man told me, if that funding isn't there, what do we do, right? What happens to my wife who relies on some of these medications and treatments? What happens to me when I cannot get that check? What happens to my world that falls apart? And he is carrying that flag, and he is wearing so proudly that uniform. And what we are doing in this act, this first act, Mr. Massey, is saying you are not important enough to give you a speaking part. Instead, we're going to give speaking parts to all kinds of other stuff that's completely irrelevant to the lives of the people in my community. That's what is so infuriating about this bill, is that it leaves out that shortfall. And Representative DeLauro, ranking member, tell us, give us a response to the idea of it could wait, it could happen later, especially in this kind of Congress where we can't get stuff through, when, as Mr. Harris said, we must attach things to must-pass legislation. What's your response to, oh, it could wait, or it's the Senate's fault, we shouldn't worry about this?
Well, the fact of the matter is this body voted for the PACT Act. We did. And we said we were going to meet a commitment to our veterans. And what we said was those who had been subject to burn pits, to toxic chemicals, et cetera, we weren't going to curtail it to one episode, but we were going to broaden the base of that so that we could provide the best medical services that we could to our veterans. Now it's time to pay the bill. There is a $12 billion shortfall. And you can, again, as I'll say, folks want to talk about mismanagement, but think about if you extend that PACT Act and that legislation to veterans of all wars. So the numbers have escalated. So maybe the fact that you don't like the accounting system in terms of the VA, but today there's a $12 billion shortfall. Veterans Health Services are on the line. And do we meet our commitment? Do we do the right thing? Do we keep a promise to our veterans? In addition to which, there's the craziness of talking about another part of the bill where we say they can spend the money on these medical services faster. There's no money to spend faster, so nobody was paying attention to what, in fact, was going into this bill, et cetera. So they're just leaving veterans behind in this effort. And I just think it is disgraceful and shameful. You can't go home to your folks Nobody should be able to go home to their folks and tell them that we are meeting the needs of the veterans in terms of their medical services. It is just not happening with this CR.
And this is their first opportunity where they could fix it, and they could fix it now.
They could
and
fix
when
right.
when we fail in our first opportunity, and as the Representative Harris has said, a must-pass bill to prioritize our veterans, we are not giving them the priority they deserve. And instead, what are we doing? Instead, what did they say is the shiny object, as Representative Massey said? The shiny object is the SAVE Act. Now, everybody knows in this room that it is already illegal to vote if you are not a citizen. It is illegal to vote if you are not a citizen. It's illegal to vote if you are a resident and not a citizen. It's illegal to vote if you're an undocumented immigrant. It is illegal to vote already. So that concern that they keep raising is not real. Instead, what did they do? This SAVE Act actually hurts my communities once again, because who do I represent? I represent Native Americans. The first Americans will no longer be able to use their tribal ID to register and vote. It's making it harder for Native Americans to vote. And I might remind people, who helped Joe Biden win Arizona? Native Americans. Who does this bill target? Native Americans. I might remind everybody that who else is it making harder to vote? We're talking about veterans. Under the SAVE Act, you would not be able to use, without additional information, a military ID to register and vote. That's insulting. And why? Why would you go after making it harder for the military to vote? We talked about this when we discussed the SAVE Act. Military participate in our elections at lower numbers than the regular population. They give their lives. They put their lives on the line, and we're saying with that military ID that you are willing to die for this country, you cannot use it to register to vote? That tells you where your priorities are, and that this is indeed political theater. Because it's not about undocumented, it's about making it harder for other people to register to vote. And I want to say, why? Why are you making it so hard for our military to vote? Is it because military voters are increasingly upset with the Republican presidential nominee, Madam Chair? I'd like to introduce the February 2024 article, open quote, "Trump disrespects the military." It's published in the National Security Action.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would point out, Madam Chair, that in the article it points out that Trump has, and I quote, "Trump has not only continued to verbally insult active duty military, prisoners at war, and follow service members. As president, he consistently failed to protect them and laughed off their injuries and deaths." With the military ID, you can fight and die for this country. But their Republican SAVE Act bill wouldn't let you use it alone to register to vote. So, I've traveled my district and heard from folks who are in situations like other people in this room who've suffered horrible disasters. Right, in my district, we've had flooding and fires. There's a disaster declaration in place to cover the hard work of recovery. But I've also met with the administrator. She was out there visiting the site, and she explained to me what is going to happen because there is not enough money to cover the obligations to help people recover. And let's face it, a flood, a fire, or tornado, or hurricane, that's not red or blue. That just destroys the lives of our communities. I'm fighting for this FEMA funding because New Mexico has 2 disaster declarations, and my citizens, my constituents will be hurt. But you know what? I'm concerned about every state. Every state, every community deserves help. Looking around this room in Kentucky, there's a disaster declaration in Kentucky. They need help. Texas, they need help. New York, South Carolina, They'll all suffer if we don't fund FEMA shortfall. Representative DeLore, can you describe what happens if we don't provide the full funding that's needed at FEMA now?
It really is pretty incredible. On last Friday, in my district in Seymour, Connecticut, where we had these flash flooding, and it wiped out a rail line. The structure underneath the rail lines just was washed away, and I went to visit the site with the emergency services, with people representing FEMA, et cetera. And the fact is that without FEMA funds, they're going to be unable to address the issues and of restoring services. And this is federal money for FEMA, there are disasters, you pointed out, all over this country, whether it is in Hawaii or Oklahoma or Connecticut or New York or wherever, that if there was, I think, they've already deferred $6.1 billion because they don't have the money to be able to move forward on projects. This is not something that was created by a Democrat or a Republican or so forth. This is it's a disaster. It's Mother Nature doing something, and these communities are going to mightily suffer, whether or not they're individuals or whether or not they're businesses that are not going to be able to deal with the kinds of services that are necessary for them to continue. If without the money, FEMA cannot move forward. They need $24 billion. And my understanding in this bill, there's $10 billion. That is a very, very big difference in what we need in order to be able to go forward to meet the disaster relief issues that are facing
So less than
country.
half of what is needed. Republicans put in the continuing resolution less of half of what is
That's right.
needed. So which business do I say, you get help,
And
but
you
I'm
don't.
sorry, on the other side of the street, your neighbor is not. When we are going to be working neighbors to neighbor, community to community, we must cover everybody. No matter where you live, whether it is in South Carolina or in New Mexico or in Connecticut or in Kentucky.
We've had a disaster, emergency disaster declaration. Towns like Seymour, Oxford, Monroe, all of these places are just trying to figure out how they're going to be able to build back. And without FEMA, they're not able to build back.
And it is just a helping hand that FEMA is coming up. It's just, it's the kind of thing you do expect government to do. When there is that kind of disaster, what kind of helping hand can you expect? And our federal law says we will provide it. But once again, it is Congress's job to fund the government, to fund our promises, to fund the PACT Act, to pass the Farm Bill. We haven't done that. So all the things we should be doing that we are not doing, and instead focusing on items that are not essential in this moment.
Well, I think there's a point also with regard to defense funding, and that, this is acute national security threats that we are faced with. And I won't go into chapter and verse because the Secretary's letter does that. But each of the services impacted under the 6-month CR, the Army, delaying development of next-generation squad weapon, lethal semi-autonomous aerial unmanned systems, and the Navy delays space and electronic warfare engineering programs. Air Force delays B-21 progress, initial operational capability. So this is a reality. Ranking on labor HHS, not on defense, and the material is coming from the Department of Defense with a reality of what happens with a 6-month continuing resolution. A point made earlier at a different time was that if you only wanted to fund defense and not do everything else, that was absolutely the wrong thing to do because we were all dependent on one another in terms of the overall security of this country. Now we're talking about if this were so important, it would have been done in another way, and let's blame the United States Senate. Look, I'm not one that carries a lot of water for what goes on in the United States Senate with some areas, but this is not the Senate's fault. This is the fault of this body here with a failure to govern, a failure to pass the bills that we could have been passing all along. We've done it before. I chaired this committee, and I've watched tough, hard negotiations week after week, month after month, until we were able to come to a conclusion, and we did it in December. We didn't carry over until the following year. It was with Senator Shelby, with Senator Leahy, with Congresswoman Granger, and myself. We made a decision to get it done and not carry it over. It can be done. There's got to be a willingness to get it done. And my view, that willingness is not here at the moment.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member. And I believe that this issue of needing to work things on that hard work and hard bipartisan work, I've enjoyed listening to the appropriators talk about how it was done in the past on that hard bipartisan work together. And if there's not anything, is there anything else you'd like to point out? I happen to be the last Democrat, so is there anything else you want to mention at this time?
I think we've made the point with regard to veterans. It's the clarity of that. The military piece, there's real clarity overall with that. I think the FEMA issue, these are the big issues that are coming out of this bill. And above all, we all know that you have to have Democrats and Republicans at the table to hammer out the bills so that in the final analysis, the president signs the bill. Otherwise, the government shuts down. That's not what happens with other pieces of legislation. That happens with the appropriations bills and with the funding bills. We can come together. We have in the past. There is no doubt in my mind that if there is a willingness to do it, let's do it. We can get started and we can make it happen by mid-December and going forward.
Thank you for your optimism, Ranking Member DeLauro. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. And I would yield to Mr. Norman.